Sharon. Actually, I'm told to look here. Hi, Sharon. Let's see, we don't hear your voice. Try to speak one more time.
Hello.
There we are. There we are. I've been told to look in this camera, so if I'm looking at this camera, talking to Sharon. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be with you, albeit virtually.
Yeah. So how many people in here would love to be more loving? All right. That's our goal today, Sharon. And the theme this year is disruption. And the reason it's disruption is because there feels like there's a lot of disruption happening. Politically, there's disruption happening. Climate change, disruption. I think AI is also disrupting a lot of things. And there's teachings for us to learn in this time of disruption. There's probably actions we can take and protests and those kinds of things. But there's also internal shifts that potentially we're being invited into. And one of those internal shifts might be to be a little more loving. So I'm curious just how you're navigating these times and what does your internal world look like? And what are the questions you're asking yourself or the practices that you're doing to help kind of harness the heart being open in a time where there's lots of change?
Well, I'm really curious about the people who did not raise their hands and say they wanted more love.
I didn't see many. Many.
Okay. That's very interesting to me because I feel like I encounter at least bewilderment and sometimes hostility at the very notion. Like people say, because as you know, I teach so much loving kindness meditation as a method of cultivation, and people would say, why in the world should I try to have compassion, for example, toward this kind of person who doesn't think someone like me should exist or is behaving so badly? And it's a profound question for us. And for me, I feel myself in a way back to how I was in the beginning of the height of the pandemic, when I ended up in Barre, Mass instead of in New York City, and the retreat center had to close and everything was so disrupted and all expectations were thwarted and there's so much uncertainty. And I kept asking myself, okay, what's still true for me? Like what has not been shattered and what's not been overcome by these conditions, by these circumstances? And that's a question I have asked myself ever since and in an onward way. And I certainly am asking now of myself and my internal state. I really prize the questioning, and I really admire people who deeply question what they can count on and what matters still. And for me, that comes back to the power of love.
Yeah, and how are you, how does that, I think a lot of us agree with that. And so when you're not accessing that love, when you read the news about something happening and you're like, that should not be happening here in this country, and that is wrong, how do you hold those emotions and whatever intensity you might feel and still keep the heart open?
Well, I don't think that response to hearing the news, for example, is antagonistic to the force of love. That's just wisdom. When it's wisdom, it's discernment, it's understanding, it's a real feeling that, this kind of sense of a rigid, separate self and other and us and them and the sort of prevalence of hatred. It's not right, and I don't think a real understanding of the force of love makes us sort of cover over that understanding. But how do we hold kind of a freedom of the heart? Because if we're enmeshed, and many people are, and it's easy to be like, as I think speaking to you once before, I said I was interviewed for an article about doom scrolling, and I didn't even know what it was. I had to ask the journalist, what does that mean? There's so many ways in which we get overwhelmed by the antipathy and the fear, and so much that happens in a time of disruption that we can't take any action because we're just so overwhelmed. And so understanding how maybe we can work to free ourselves from like over immediate reaction and being enmeshed, consumed by what's bad, to the utter neglect of what's good. You know, there's, I'm sure right in the room, you know, there's so much effort toward the good and opening and taking care of one another and things like that, that we need to have a mind that's big enough to take it all in.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what is your perspective on inquiring about our own identities as we do this kind of reflection? Because I notice sometimes I'll notice like, well, I'm the good person and they're the bad people, right? Like, I'm the noble one, there's not the noble one. And yet I know if I actually really reflect into that, there is a shared humanity that exists, and probably even shared hopes and fears for a better world or for more safety. We have different ideas maybe on what that better world is. And I'm curious, in your own reflections, what are the kinds of inquiries that you're making, and what's the role that identity does or doesn't play between being outraged when there's something outrageous to be outraged by, or being into this person, like, how dare this happen to me? And why should this happen in my country? You know, it's like there's more of a different energy from those different, you know, approaches.
Well, here too, you know, I think there's a certain flavor to compassion. It's a face of love, you know, that admits suffering. It's sort of focusing not on the degree of suffering, because clearly we all suffer in different ways and different degrees, but just the sheer vulnerability. It's like the fragility of life, the insecurity, the uncertainty is something we all share. And we can kind of remember that as we look at one another. And it's still, you know, I would maintain, doesn't mean we take on the view of it's all the same, because I don't believe it's all the same. You know, and yet, you know, we can have that sense of compassion. And I feel like I do, you know, I do have that kind of vibratory resonance, like, ooh, you know, like, what an interesting and weird thing to devote your life to. You're like making other people feel small, or, you know, keeping them like away or whatever it might be. And it's like, how would that be? What would the internal experience of that be? And it wouldn't be very nice, I'm sure. And so I do genuinely, I think, feel kind of compassion. But what I, you know, find myself needing to say over and over again is that does not block powerful action. You know, it really doesn't.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm wondering, I want to give a chance for people to get in dialogue with you, because I think this is a rich topic. And I was wondering, before we go into that, would it be possible to guide us in a short little practice, maybe 5 to 7 minutes of connecting to that place that you just spoke about, of that kind of more heartful place that sees reality or sees things as they are, and also has a certain, I don't know if hopefulness is the right word, but a certain joy or openness in that. Is that possible?
Sure, why not? We can do that in 5 to 7. Of course.
All right, so why don't you guide us, and then we'll open it up for questions with Sharon. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Great. Or whatever time, you know, we have 20 minutes left, and I want to have like some time for questions. So whatever makes sense to you.
Okay, that's great. We can do some loving kindness practice, actually, which is often done by the silent repetition of certain phrases. And the phrases are meant to help us pay attention differently. So in other words, if you're the kind of person who at the end of the day, you think of yourself almost to kind of evaluate yourself, like, how did I do today? And let's just say you're the kind of person who fixates on, who just is consumed by thinking about the mistakes you made and the problems you had and the ways you didn't show up. So we're going to just open that perspective through those phrases and wish ourselves well.
Beautiful.
Instead of going through the list of our faults one more time. Right. And then with others, as we call them to mind, we'll offer those phrases as a gesture of gift giving or blessing, and not trying to force a certain emotion or feeling, but just to see what happens as we pay attention differently, okay?
Beautiful.
So you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not. Just let your energy settle into your body. And interestingly, the first recipient classically of this kind of goodwill is ourselves. So you can repeat silently certain phrases that exemplify that gift you would wish to give yourself, like, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. And just gather all your attention behind one phrase at a time. And should your attention wander or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You can realize that, see if you can gently let go, and just bring your attention back to the phrases. And then think of someone who's helped you. Maybe they've helped you be at this meeting, or they've helped you long ago. Maybe you never even met them, but they've inspired you from afar. So this is like an embodiment of the force of love for you. Just see who comes to mind. Maybe an adult, maybe a child, maybe a pet. Buddhist texts say this is the one, when you think of them, you smile. So is there someone, you just call them to mind and they just kind of lift you? They lift your spirits. And if so, bring them here. You can get an image of them, say their name to yourself, get a feeling for their presence, and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Remember, it's gift giving, it's blessing. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. And someone you know who's struggling right now, who's really having a difficult time, bring them here. And see what happens as you offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. And everybody there, as you're co-creating this experience, may we be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. And all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you have a question for Sharon, any of those who are working on cultivating love, please raise your hand and we'll have a mic find you. I'm wondering, Sharon, before we get to questions from the audience, could you say a little bit about, at least in the Buddhist perspective, why does the Buddha emphasize practicing metta or loving kindness? And what did he say were the benefits of practicing that?
Well, they say the legend surrounding the Buddha first teaching loving kindness meditation was that he taught it as the antidote to fear. So that's relevant,
yeah.
Right? I've been very intrigued by your word disruption, because what does it imply? It implies for a lot of people an awful lot of fear.
Yeah.
In facing uncertainty. And so I actually think it's a perfect match. And then there are the obvious benefits of living. First of all, the force of loving kindness, because it is a force. It's not just sentimentality or papering over what's a really conflicted situation. It's a force because it reflects the truth. And the truth that it reflects is interconnection, that our lives really have something to do with one another, that they're intertwined, and it's very different than liking somebody or wanting to spend time with them or approving of them. But it's that bone deep realization that our lives are really connected, and everything that develops from that understanding.
When you say we're really connected, meaning like we breathe the same air, we're the same, we basically have the same motivations, we suffer in the same way. When we lose something, we both feel pain. When we have joy, we both feel. Is that the kind of the similarities of experience as humans?
Yeah, and I think there's also, it doesn't take a kind of meditative or spiritual understanding to see it, that economics shows us this, and epidemiology shows us this, and environmental consciousness certainly shows us this, that what happens over there doesn't nicely stay over there.
Yeah.
It ripples out over here, and what we do, it really matters, because we feel so alone sometimes and so isolated and so cut off, but that's not actually the truth of things. Like my very favorite question going to an organization or a company to teach is, how many other people need to be doing their jobs well for you to do your job well?
Wow.
And suddenly you realize, oh, I'm part of a network, aren't I? I don't have to think that way.
Yeah, the tech bros tend to think it's all them, but there is a group that's like, I am the greatest, I have the greatest idea, I'm most amazing. But if we actually reflect on it, there's a lot of that interconnectedness that I think is there. And I think part of what we see throughout the world really is when people don't feel connected, don't feel loved, don't feel safe, they tend to want leaders that come in to then say, I will make you I alone will make you safe. I alone will make you feel valuable. I alone, and it takes the power from sometimes the collective, because it's not in the collective, and they try to then possess it. And I feel like that's somewhat happening, and maybe the antidote then is this, a more loving world is the antidote. Maybe the Buddha was right. You know, a more loving world is actually the antidote to some of the ways that we see things unfolding in the planet. Yeah. All right, so questions for Sharon. You have a mic here? Let me know if you need it, if question repeated. Question, comment, reflection, whatever is on your heart.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, Sharon. My name is Brian.
Hi.
I've had the good opportunity to share metta practice with family and friends and communities, and I've often introduced it as a way to practice these feelings that I want to have be more automatic when I'm presented with people in these situations, whether it's myself or people who are close to me, or often I'll bring to mind someone who it's difficult to love. I just wanted to share that and see if you have any reflections or any refinements to that idea that you would suggest.
I think that's wonderful. And I also think we do a formal practice if you choose to do that for precisely what you're implying, which is that it comes into our life. You know, we don't practice the meditation to become a great meditator. In fact, it's to have a different life with the way we treat ourselves when we make a mistake. How do we speak to ourselves? And the way we meet a stranger, and the way we kind of encapsulate somebody as all bad all the time, never possibly changing, you know. And what happens when we loosen the grip of that somewhat? It's all life. It's actually happening in life. So I have, of course, a great fondness for formal practice in just that way. I also, recently, I was highly amused by a friend of mine talking about microdosing loving kindness. You know, something like looking at a Zoom screen, like if you see lots of little faces silently, it's always good to be silent. You know, may you be safe, may you be safe, may you be safe, may you be safe, and just bring it consciously into life that way.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? Questions? Let's see. Over here. Okay. Please, if you stand up, we can see you a little easier.
Okay. Sorry.
And if you want to say your first name, we'll all be practicing. We'll all microdose metta as you speak, so you should feel very good.
Great.
Okay. Hi, Sharon. My name's Wendy. So happy you're here. Hi. I feel an abundance of love coming through me, and it's just my joy to share it. But I was really gaslit for about 10 years, and it was very wounding. And I spent about a year, a lot of time in nature by myself, healing. And now I feel like in romantic relationships, I still feel a lot of fear, and I don't know how to trust my intuition about people. I'm working on it. Like, how do you manage being open, but discerning and protective when necessary? I watched my mother get really hurt, and she closed down and she became bitter, and I don't want that for myself. So any advice you have?
Thank you. And I really understand that. And I think there's also a kind of, I feel kind of collective, obviously a collective experience of gaslighting happening. And it's very hard for somebody, it's been hard for me, you know, to, I feel like I had a childhood with lots of secrets, and that sense of I sense something that no one is talking about is very prevalent in me. And so if I watch the news, for example, and I feel obviously there's distortions and there's deception going on, it's very hard for me. And what I've learned, and I think especially if you're talking about a romantic relationship, is some confidence in the ability to communicate, which will take care of that sort of, I don't know if I can trust my feeling, and I don't know what's really going on, and learn sort of the conviction that you can be communicating and you can express uncertainty, or you can ask for clarification, or you can be honest in some way, and that builds the that's the building block of a different kind of relationship anyway, and so, and in a less sort of intimate situation, I think we still have to kind of stand firm on our right to try to discern the truth, and that's okay. And that, by the way, I think is another reason in this kind of collective situation why a community is so important, and to have a sense of people who share your values and who you can all help one another. We can all help one another in kind of parsing out the truth and not sort of having a kind of very familiar, perhaps traumatized reaction to not being told the truth.
Yeah. I notice sometimes, I don't know exactly what you had meant about gaslighting, but I remember my son, when he would want something from me, a new computer or a new something when he was younger, he'd be like, well, Dad, I'm really disappointed because I thought you were a really loving, caring dad, and I'm really disappointed. And I'd be like, that little shit. And I thought, well, isn't it, if I became curious, isn't it curious that he manipulates me this way? Like, he could all kinds of things to manipulate me, but he's finding this one thing because he probably knows intuitively or rationally, like, oh, this might get him, right? Like, if I tell him he's not a loving dad, like, he'll lose consciousness and he'll just give in. If I tell him, something else. So I had to notice that part in me that would give up myself because I thought, oh, I have to be this kind of person. And then later realized, no, that's not, like, you can't have the computer, you little shit. Like, that was actually the better response. Or something like that was actually the better response. Did you want to say more to that? You grabbed the mic again, or I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. So yesterday we talked a little about how there were sort of the high forces and the low forces with the former Surgeon General, and he talked about power and control being two of the things that are kind of in the lower end. And in my life, I'm navigating co-parenting with an ex that sort of, can optimize for those things some of the time. Mm-hmm. He's also a good human. And I've learned the hard way, kind of to Soren's point of let me operate with loving kindness, that sometimes loving kindness has to have some boundaries and some force. And, I'm learning that at times sort of stepping into my anger and firmness is actually what works. Mm. And I don't like being that person, but I also want to do something that's effective. And I wonder if you can give any guidance to that, because I'm finding that I'm getting, after trying the loving kindness and the collaborative and not having it not work, that I'm getting a lot more access to this anger, but I don't like who I'm becoming when I do it. So.
Well, I'd probably try to make a distinction between anger and forcefulness, or feeling anger and being submerged or lost in anger. Those are two different things. Mm-hmm. And, again, going back to Buddhist psychology, they talk about the motivation or the intention behind an action, which could be loving kindness for yourself and for someone else and your child, all together. It's not only for the other person, the other partner. And that's a little different than the skillfulness or the unskillfulness of the action. Like, we know there's such a thing as tough love, for example. We know that compassion needs to exist with boundaries, especially if you're in kind of a caregiving sort of role. And so first of all, I'd give yourself permission to be forceful and not think, well, that's the death of my compassionate heart, or, yeah. I failed or something like that. We can be motivated by a sense of, say, loving kindness for ourselves and for someone else at the same time. Look for balance and try to act in a way that's most skillful for that moment. Sometimes we say no. Sometimes we're fierce. Sometimes we have a strong boundary. Anger is just like an energy, and we can use it, but sometimes it's so overwhelming that, like if you think about the last time you were really, really angry at yourself, all you can think about is that stupid thing you said. You don't think, hey, I said 5 great things the same morning. Those 5 great things are gone. And so it's confusing and it's distorting when it's overwhelming. Yeah. And we lose a lot of information, but we want the energy of it, for sure. And I don't think that denies the presence of loving kindness or compassion.
Yeah. I've always liked that phrase. I don't know who said it, but you can put somebody out of your house without putting them out of your heart. Or, you can.
Yeah, well, it started with Neem Karoli Baba.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Never throw anyone out of your heart.
Yeah.
And then Sylvia Boorstein had an amendment to that. She said, never throw anyone out of your heart. You might throw them out of your life, but never throw them out of your heart.
That's great. Sharon, thank you for joining us. Blessings to you for your work in the world. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.